Along the most militarized border in the world, a diplomatic pause in a conflict more than 70 years old. A delegation of 5 people from Pyongyang crossed over to meet their South Korean counterparts.
Our talks begin after a long period of severed ties between the North and the South, but I believe the first step is half the journey.
At the end, both sides agreed that North Korean athletes could attend next month's Winter Olympics. They also agreed to hold future military talks and re-establish a hotline between the two countries. It will be the first time North Korea will take part in the Winter Games since 2010 in Vancouver. This particular brand of sport diplomacy has historical precedence in the conflict, albeit to little effect. As far back as 1964, the two Koreas have discussed fielding a joint Olympics team and have raised a unification flag at major sporting events in the past. South Korean President Moon Jae-in has said he wants to see that happen again. There have been major concerns that Pyongyang could cast a shadow over the upcoming Winter Games in South Korea. And with good reason. The year before it hosted the 1988 Summer Olympics, 115 people were killed in a plane bombing carried out by 2 North Korean agents. And in 2002, when South Korea co-hosted the World Cup, Pyongyang's patrol boats opened fire on a South Korean Navy ship in the Yellow Sea. 6 South Koreans were killed. The surprise move by North Korea to hold the first talks with its neighbor in more than 2 years has allayed some fears of a similar scenario.
Regarding the nuclear issues, our strategic weapons, including the atomic bomb, hydrogen bomb, and intercontinental ballistic missiles, are only aimed at the United States, not our brethren.
Conspicuously missing from the meeting were any representatives from the administration of US President Donald Trump, although he did take credit.
It's a start. It's a big start. If I weren't involved, they wouldn't be talking about Olympics right now. They'd be doing no talking, or they would be much more serious.
After a year of belligerent hyperbole exchanged between North Korea and the United States, the talks between the two Koreas have come as a relief. But the looming issue remains North Korea's nuclear program, something Pyongyang says isn't up for discussion. Randolph Nogle, The Newsmakers.
Well, to discuss this, I'm joined from Medford, Massachusetts by Sung-Yoon Lee. He's the Kim Koo Korea Foundation Professor of Korean Studies at the Fletcher School at Tufts University. And in Washington, retired Professor Han Park. He's the founding director at the Center for the Study of Global Issues. And completing our panel from Hong Kong, we have David Zweig. He's the director of the Center on China's Transnational Relations at Hong Kong University of Science and Technology. Gentlemen, I thank you all for joining us. Han Park, let me begin with you, sir. So it's a bit of a cliche for people to say sport might bring about reunification and peace, but might that actually happen when it comes to North and South Korea when we look at what's going to happen in Pyeongchang?
Yes, I would think so. It's not Pyeongchang itself. It's the climate change. In Korea, South Korea, you have a new government, very progressive Moon Jae-in regime as a result of people's so-called candlelight revolution. In North Korea, we have a new leadership that requires very urgently the supply of food and energy. So these things combined with the Pyeongchang Olympic event will mix very well. Yes, the Pyeongchang thing will be quite successful, and it will lead to some further development in inter-Korea.
Okay, so Sung-Yoon Lee, just a few months ago, everybody was talking about, Dennis Rodman being the last hope for anyone to ever talk to the North Koreans. Now we're seeing the South Koreans and the North Koreans actually talking to each other. Big momentum shift, right?
It is, and the atmospherics have changed far more favorably than they have been over the past few months. But one has to ask, why now? Did Kim Jong-un all of a sudden wake up on New Year's Day and have a change of heart? Of course not. His annual New Year's address is prepared weeks, if not months ahead of time. South Korea was awarded the Winter Olympiad many years ago, back in 2011. So why now? Well, after a triumphant ballistic year in 2017, it makes perfect sense for Kim to de-escalate, dangle a few carrots, change the dynamics so that South Korea would take the bait and be in a position to take the leading role in prematurely relaxing sanctions against North Korea, which have become quite tough over the past year. So North Korea is very good at wielding both the carrot and stick. Now, will this be good for the region? Sure, in the short term, but on the thorny question of nuclear issues and missile programs, nothing will change.
Okay, so David Zweig, Sung-Yoon Lee, long-term doesn't trust them. He believes this is a bit of a ploy. Are you as cynical?
Well, I think it certainly helps to have this kind of discussion. But, you know, we've seen before new presidents come in who are much more interested in what we call sunshine policy and talking to the North. And the North has been willing to talk. They've gotten money off of it. We know that they've been paid. Kim Jong-un, Kim's father was paid a significant amount of money to engage in talks. So there's usually something behind it. But again, you know, I think even Professor Park, who has a very upbeat view of this, recognizes that the sanctions, I think, are probably also biting. So I think it's atmospherics. But I think it's also that the North's under pressure from the sanctions. So I think it's both.
Han Park, the other two gentlemen are not as optimistic as you are. Tell me why you're so optimistic as you see this unfolding.
Inter-Korea relations, one has to realize that there is a strong element of nationalism, both in the North and the South. They're divided for such a long time with millions of separated families in the generally Confucian society where family is a very important element. So here, that nationalism made, in fact, forced the North and South Korean regimes, current regimes, to be talking to each other because North Korea needs economic development, South Korea needs further legitimization for the entire peninsula. So this is a good time, and without underlying nationalism, this would not have happened that swiftly.
Yeah, Professor Park, who bends? Like,
Can I
just a second, David, just a second. I just want to ask Professor Park, who bends, right? Because I remember when I was in North Korea, clearly, you ask them, what's the population of your country? They say 75 million, because they include the South as well. They consider themselves one people. They want reunification, but they want it on their terms. They give no indication that they're willing to bend whatsoever in order to have reunification as a kind of push and pull and you know, listening to the other side. On the other hand, you have the South and the West and everybody else saying this Juche system, which is a hodgepodge of communism and other things, doesn't work, it's terrible, it causes famine, and so on. So my question is, who's actually going to bend if you have a peace deal?
No one should bend. The two systems are so different. They each is complete sovereign state. And therefore, the only way of putting these guys together is by recognizing their uniquenesses, their rules, characteristics. So we've got to have some sort of confederate system where two systems are mutually respected and accepted. That's the only intermediate stage toward unified Korea.
Okay, David, you want to come in?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that, you know, I taught for many years, in fact, at the Fletcher School. And one of the things that always struck me when I taught was how strongly Korean students felt that this is really something that it's very, very important to them. On the other hand, you know, I think that the push for reunification in South Korea has decreased over time. The new younger generation, I think, really doesn't care that much. They've grown up in a separate world. Leftist students used to go to the border and carry out massive protests in support of reunification. I get the sense, and maybe the other two speakers want to talk about this, but I get the sense from my interactions that it's just that will for reunification within the younger generation has died. So it's, you know, there may not be so much support from the South.
Maybe within South Korea, you are correct to a certain extent. It's a very pragmatic capitalist system. But things will change. You have to look at both sides.
Right.
The element of unification, the nationalism in South is strong, still very strong, even younger generation.
Right. Let me bring in Sung-Yoon Lee and ask if it's actually possible, as has been suggested, to have the kind of integrity ideologically and politically of both systems under some sort of umbrella as the end goal, or whether that ship has sailed and we're merely in a situation where we don't want North Korea to nuke anyone, and that's what peace is.
In the real world, a fair, equitable merger between a giant multinational corporation, shall we say, and a startup mom-and-pop store is impossible. You have to look at the nature of the two Korean states. You have a model failed state, an extreme totalitarian state in the Kim regime that is unique in world history for having attained the great advantages of full industrialization, urbanization, and near 100% literacy among the adult population, yet to have suffered a famine. In the South, you have a far more successful, attractive, legitimate state that is a magnet to the North Korean people. So this kind of equal basis unification, a merger between the two Korean states, is a fantasy. On Professor Park's point of strong ethnic nationalism, I fully agree, and this has actually negative implications in the short term. For North Korea, trumping up this pan-Korean bond, identity, Koreanness, by us, ourselves, Korean only, exclusive of the US, that sentiment resonates powerfully both in the North and South. And that sentiment is expressed in the Korean 우리 민족끼리. Literally, it means by ourselves, Koreans only. And North Korea runs a propaganda website under that name. And that formulation, that phrase, appears in various statements between the two Korean states. And it's benignly translated into English as inter-Korean relations. That 민족, ethnic Korean people, that word appears 4 times in a 3-paragraph long joint statement that just came out of the first round of inter-Korean talks. What that means is, under the rubric of Korean identity, taking charge of their own destiny, independent of the pesky US, you will see discussions and negotiations in the coming weeks on controversial issues like restarting inter-Korean economic projects and so on. And the intent here on the part of the North is to drive a wedge between the South and the United States so that we go back to the heady old days of South Korea unconditionally subsidizing North Korea as the US is trying to sanction the same target. That leads to policy incoherence, contradiction. It's a small victory for Kim Jong-un.
Okay, so David Zweig, for the moment, the Trump administration isn't as cynical as Professor Lee about this situation. They're actually taking the credit for what's going on now. So we saw a sort of good cop, bad cop thing going on with Trump's tweets on the one hand, little rocket man, fire and fury and whatever. And on the other hand, you have Rex Tillerson, the Secretary of State, saying we want to talk to the North Koreans and we want a deal, right? The U.S. is taking the credit for this. Are they right to?
I'm not sure that I would see that as a coherent strategy of good cop, bad cop. That could just as easily have been incoherence within the Trump administration. So
does that incoherence play any part in what's happening right now?
Well, I think I'm not sure. You know, I think that Kim sees, as Professor Lee said, I think Kim sees Kim in the North sees a good chance to drive a wedge between the U.S. And the South, particularly when you've got a leadership that supports sunshine policy, a leadership in the South that actually wants to have and is willing to make serious concessions. I think when you say who's going to bend, I mean, it looks like the South's going to bend. I mean, this costs the North nothing to go to this meeting. They don't have to talk very much or rarely talk about or really don't raise the issue of nuclear. They're going to hold on to their weapons. I think they'll make no concessions on that. And to a certain extent, I may disagree with Professor Lee on this. I think that they're smart to have the weapons. I think from their perspective, the United States is a serious threat to the North Korean regime. And I think the United States has to send out a message very clearly. And I think that was partly Tillerson's message, that the United States is not interested in regime change, and that maybe if the discussion had been like that, maybe the North might not have built the nuclear system, but the weapons. But they've been planning that for a long time.
So Han Park, let me ask you, because this is the suggestion built into what the other two guests are saying, that Moon Jae-in might be being played right now by the North. He might be taken for a ride in a process in which he capitulates and a wedge is driven between him and the United States.
Yeah, I think we've got to look at North Korea, not just a failed system, but a unique system. What system in the world with that kind of economic difficulty and political isolation would have developed military capability as well as North Korea? It's impossible. It's an anomaly. One has to be able to explain that. I have explained it. I have visited North Korea some 50 times. I know that system inside out. But if you define North Korea as a failed system, then you're looking at through the lens of Germany or South Korea.
Okay.
That it will not work.
Okay, interesting point. Let me ask Sung-Yoon Lee, and this will be our final word. Not a failed system, just a unique system. That should be your starting point when you talk to them, and then you might see things turn out better. That's the proposal by Han Park. Tell me why you're not so sure about that.
Well, North Korea is truly unique. According to virtually all annual surveys by credible human rights watchdogs, in terms of press freedom, religious freedom, basic freedom, freedom of speech, information, North Korea comes in without fail dead last. So North Korea is unique in that not so favorable aspect. What does that mean? It means, again, you have in the Korean Peninsula 2 Korean states, an ongoing contest for pan-Korean legitimacy. And as Trump said, addressing the South Korean National Assembly a couple of months ago, the sheer existence of a successful, thriving South Korea presents a challenge. It threatens the very survival of the dictatorial North. So that is the reality that we have to understand. Sports diplomacy is inherently sexy, it's glamorous, and I think the very uniquely unglamorous nature of the Kim regime and the inherent glamour of sports diplomacy will probably produce a smashing success in terms of the Winter Olympics. But in the long term, it will favor Kim. Will the South and the United States gain anything on security interests? I don't think so.
Gentlemen, it's been a pleasure talking to all of you. I thank you all for joining us here on the Newsmakers. I'd love to have you on the show again in the future, but for the moment, Han Park, Sung-Yoon Lee, and David Zweig, thanks again.